Good evening. Welcome to the Thursday, April 10th, 2014 meeting of the Indian River County Planning and Zoning Commission. The first item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. And Jordan, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Item number 2 on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from the March 27th, 2014 P&Z meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
It was Todd and Dr. Day. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item number 3. This is a public hearing. It's a consideration of a county-initiated land development regulation amendment to create Section 911.29. It's a special overlay regulation for West Gifford Industrial and Commerce Area on 163 acres of property in West Gifford, currently zoned general industrial. You ready to take over for us here?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, County Community Development Director Stan Bowling. I do want to go through a PowerPoint presentation to give you all some background and look at some maps of the subject area. Shown on your monitors and on the screens is the West Gifford area. To the right is 43rd Avenue, here on the right side of the screen going north and south. 58th Avenue going north and south here on the left-hand side of the screen. 45th Street going east and west here in this direction, and 41st Street at the bottom. And the area that is outlined in the black and purple border is the 163 acres of property within what we're calling West Gifford Industrial Area that is zoned IG, General Industrial. And you can see from this aerial, this property that's zoned industrial goes from 43rd Avenue most of the way over to 58th Avenue, but it does have some configurations in and around some residential subdivisions. To the eastern area, you can see this yellow cross-hatched area. That's county-owned property, facilities for supervisor of elections, for instance, emergency services, and utility services. There are also a number of other uses that have existed for some time in the area, some existing junkyards, especially fronting along 45th Street, but going pretty deep back into the properties on the eastern portion of the site. There are quite a bit of vacant acreage or acreage that could be redeveloped. We have, for instance, a truss plant here. We do have an industrial subdivision with some industrial uses here off of a little bit north of 41st Street. The Jeff Thompson Overo Mill Works established. We have Plant Foods, a mulch facility out here, Cathco, a few of these other types of uses that are general industrial in nature or allowed in the general industrial district. You can also see from this particular map that are in some of these colored areas here that are in different colors. Those are residential platted subdivisions. Many of them were actually platted in the 1950s. And this generally industrial zoning has been in place for about as long as that as well, going back to the 1950s. If you step back from that particular area, you'll see that this is just from the county zoning map and the Gifford area in general. That kind of medium shade purple, what is that 163 acres now? And I want to point out a few of the other zoning districts that are around that 163 acres. The lighter shade purple or lavender is light industrial, IL, and you can see a number of cases where that's right up against industrial, general industrial, and on the south side of 41st Street. And then the red area is zone heavy commercial, more of a warehousing type of district with some kind of limited manufacturing allowed. You can see those in some adjacent areas as well. And then as you go a little bit further out, you can see close to and in and around the IG zoned area, residential zoning districts. This kind of tan-colored is single family, up to 6 units per acre. The darker brown areas in here are more medium density. As you get to some pockets of pre-existing, more densely platted development. And then on the east side of 43rd Avenue, you can see kind of the denser residential areas in East Gifford, and to the west, on the west side of 58th Avenue, RS3, 3-unit per acre single-family zoning. But all told, not only are there some industrial and heavy commercial districts, but again, quite a bit of residential development and zoning all around this particular area. Now, as you've known from the staff report and probably listening in on some board activities, there's a long history to the initiative that's before you, and I do want to go through that, but I think it's important to see how we've gotten to the point where we are tonight. In 2009, Gifford representatives became aware of what was then proposed as a prestige concrete batch plant. That batch plant had received site plan approval at a staff level, as was allowed by the code, and they requested that the area be rezoned from IG to IL, light industrial. Staff presented some analysis to the Board of County Commissioners after that, and the board authorized staff to work with representatives and report back to them. And at that point in time, staff pretty much went over some of the downsides of downzoning from IG to IL, and we're looking to kind of do a cooperative effort between community leaders, residents, and property owners. Also, right at that time, in the fall of 2009, staff implemented a contact procedure where interested parties in Gifford, community leaders and other people, are emailed every time there's a proposed development project, even a pre-application conference for anything in the Gifford area. And that list has grown over the years, and I think it's served a good purpose in keeping community leaders and residents familiar and up to speed on any proposed developments that come through. They're invited to come to meetings with staff and applicants, and they have participated at different times for different projects that have been proposed since 2009. In 2010, staff and Gifford representatives reported back to the Board of County Commissioners with a draft district and rezoning proposal. At that time, the proposal was to rezone the 163 acres to a yet-to-be-created new zoning district. And one of the concepts at that time was to eliminate some of the heavier industrial uses and add some more commercial type or light industrial type of uses not currently allowed in IG as a trade-off. Staff conducted workshops with property owners, and at the initial workshop, property owners had strong objections to eliminating any uses, but they did support clean industry, clean operations, and upgrading aesthetics in the area. And then for the next basically one-year period, 2010 to 2011, staff met with the Gifford Executive Group, which consisted of a number of community leaders and also property owner in the area. We had a lot of drafts and revisions, did a lot of work and analysis. There was also a tour of that group of Prestige's existing concrete batch plant in Eau Gallie. And that was an eye-opener. Opened up a lot of our senses, actually, when we were there. Because although I think Prestige had not originally developed the plant, in fact, they had, before we got there, had upgraded the plant, but we just found evidence of a lot of potentially negative impacts to residential, and there was residential in close proximity, is still to that plant. Staff conducted a second property owners workshop in 2012, and that meeting was not productive. And Deputy County Attorney Bill DeBrawl, at the what I'll call the close of that meeting, offered to mediate and to basically break down the groups and people who had different properties there to kind of get in a smaller setting, one-on-one even, to meet with people and go over concerns. And so Mr. DeBrawl conducted those mediation efforts for quite some time during 2012 and 2013, separate meetings with property owners and Gifford representatives. Toward the end of that mediation time, staff also got input as we had community meetings on the Gifford Neighborhood Plan update. And in those meetings, there were concerns generally that were expressed about a variety of topics in Gifford, but it also included impacts of industrial on residential. And concrete plants in particular came up quite a bit. Some observations, I think, from staff going through this pretty lengthy process up to this point. One thing that we think is important to note for all parties is that the appearance of new development in the Gifford area and anywhere else for that matter is much different than the appearance of older development. There are corridor regulations in effect along the major roadways in Gifford, just like other areas of the county. And the newer development that you see in Gifford, the examples of it, I think, speak for themselves in terms of the, the aesthetic appearance, the landscaping, kind of the quality and the layout. Also, there seemed to be an agreement between all parties on, jobs and cleanly run businesses being a positive thing for everybody. Residents' concerns that they've continued to express are based on past experiences. There have been a lot of instances in the Gifford area over the years of environmental concerns from different uses that have been there or been abandoned or not been properly attended to, as well as experiences with a previous owner of the mulch facility in the area, mismanaging, in a sense, perhaps the site and having fires occur there and impacts from that. I would also say that property owners express concerns from their experiences as well. And one of kind of the repeating themes that came through to staff a lot during this exercise was, where do regulations end? These are business owners that do see regulation changes all the time from different jurisdictions that they have to deal with. And, kind of question is, in working with basically what's essentially a compromise type of situation here, will this be kind of the compromise and the end of regulatory kind of growth for the properties in that area? In terms of the mediation, and Bill's here himself to comment or answer questions at any point, but I'd say some of the main points coming out of mediation was, I think there was general agreement, and if not, maybe agreement was too strong, no vehement objections to a lot of the heavy industrial uses being eliminated. And we'll go over that list in a moment. And I think a lot of them are just probably not practical in the area. It's probably not that big of a benefit to a property owner, but it also, I think, helps residents taking off the table, so to speak, the possibility of some things like a steel mill that is allowed technically under the zoning, but it's not a probable use there. Certain uses can be added, and I think the key here is that adding in some of the commercial type of uses and business service uses makes sense in this area, especially if some of those very heavy industrial uses, like a sawmill, like a textile mill, like a steel mill, are eliminated. Because actually, among commercial uses industrial, you can have incompatibilities if you have a very heavy industrial use right next to a commercial use. So those two are kind of tied together, and I think it's important to look at them as a set. Property owners expressed strongly, and this makes a lot of sense, that they wanted to retain the existing zoning, the existing industrial general zoning, for a number of reasons. One is, even given kind of the overlay proposal now, most of the uses that are allowed in IG would continue to be IG. And also that's a familiar designation, it's a familiar term. If anybody asks them, a potential buyer or a lender, if they're trying to refinance, an industrial district is something people easily recognize. If you came up with a brand new name, it could just cause issues. And I think from the residents' perspective, I think they would agree that as long as the regulations are effective in terms of addressing their concerns, then that's fine if there's another way to do it. And the overlay district regulation approach is another way to do it. It's somewhat similar to what we've done already in other areas of the county with corridor regulations for aesthetic improvements. 3 uses came out of the mediation results that were especially contentious: concrete batch plants, demolition debris sites, also sometimes referred to as demolition debris facilities, and mulch operations. And there was perhaps some hope, I should say, out of those mediation efforts that regulating the 3 uses might be a way forward to compromise, essentially. And that is part of the overlay regulations that you all are going to consider here in a little bit. The Board of County Commissioners on February 18th considered draft overlay regulations, much like the regulations that's in front of you. I'll point out the differences a little bit later. They had a 3-hour discussion input time on February 18th. What came out of that, the board essentially supported the overlay approach, retaining the IG and eliminating and adding some uses. Concrete batch plants and demolition debris as special exception use, I think that came out that the board saw and I think believes that probably requires the highest scrutiny of regulation. Mulch facilities definitely need special regulations, I think, but also I think the concerns were, I would say, fewer, maybe narrower, in that In particular, fire protection was really what kind of came through, and has, I think, been the experience of the residents in the area of the biggest concern with mulch facilities. There are also, board members expressed some concerns about the cost of one of the requirements I'll go into in a little bit, about upgrading the appearance of junkyards along 45th Street, whether or not a development application comes in, and we have some cost information now. It's in your backup, and I'll go over that in a moment. The board voted 4-1 to have staff initiate the LDR amendment, which is why we're before you all tonight. We have initiated that process, and the P&Z is part of it. They also voted to, with the same motion, to invoke the pending ordinance doctrine, which means that the draft regulations that were before the board on February 18th are in effect for any new development applications that come in. The one dissenting vote, I will point out, was actually expressed by the commissioner that they would actually like to make the proposal more stringent and actually prohibit batch plants and demolition debris. So I think, again, overall there was, I would say, unanimous support in moving forward, but one of the commissioners wanted it to actually be more stringent. I wanted to point that out. The proposed overlay regulations that are before you all, much like what was before the board on February 18th, the existing 163 acres would retain their IG zoning. We would not actually rezone them to a different district. The overlay regulations would modify the list of allowed uses and retain most of the existing uses that are allowed in the existing IG zoning district. What is proposed is to eliminate or prohibit 15 uses. None of them currently exist on the 163 acres. Again, we think that they're unlikely to be developed in this particular location. And some of those 15 we've got listed out here: adult entertainment, airports, landfills, manufacturing plants for tobacco, paper, tires, petroleum, steel, and cement. The entire list of uses, we have a couple of charts attached. It's in your backup in terms of if you wanted to kind of look at a chart of all the uses. 39 uses are proposed to be added. Auto repair sales, carpet and dry cleaning, some kind of business services, equipment rental, repair services. A use that we weren't aware of until we started this exercise, that you could have a more modern type of salvage facility that's completely indoors and enclosed, like inside of a warehouse type of building, and those would be permitted. Paint and hardware stores as well is on that list of uses to add. The choices for in particular for the three uses that were the most contentious: concrete batch plants, mulch operations, and demolition debris sites. There's really four basic options. One is permitted, site plan only, and right now concrete batch plants and mulch operations are both permitted in the IG. Demolition debris is special exception in the current code. Administrative permit is kind of the next level. Special criteria can be required, and in most cases a planning and zoning commission review is required unless the code specifies that staff can approve it. So in almost all cases, but not all, administrative permit use requires planning and zoning commission review. It's not a public hearing, but it does require your review. Special exception is the most stringent of the types here. Planning and zoning commission and board approval or review are needed at public hearings. There's special criteria, and there's even a higher bar for proving, essentially demonstrating, I should say, that the applicant has to demonstrate compatibility with surrounding uses and no adverse impacts. And then the fourth option is simply to prohibit and eliminate a particular use. The proposal that's before you all tonight has been updated. Staff believes that, given some of the input from the board on February 18th, concrete batch plants and demolition debris facilities should be treated as special exception uses. It provides opportunity for the property owner to go forward, but it's a very high bar and very stringent requirements. There's notice and input. There's the Planning and Zoning Commission review, and the Board of County Commissioners makes the final decision in that case. And the criteria and the standards are just higher. It's a much higher review for those types of applications. Now, the criteria that's in your backup for batch plants and demolition debris, It's a 300-foot separation between outdoor stockpiling and unloading and processing areas in the closest residential dwelling or zoning district. There's dust and noise control, design requirements, the use of structural enclosures, and all of the list of industrial best management practices, otherwise known as BMPs, may be applied. Goes into a number of kind of environmental protection areas, as well as extra buffering, and that would be determined, if and when such an application came in. And it also includes monitoring runoff and air emissions, establishing a baseline, and making sure that DEP compliance is actually kind of demonstrated at various points. Some of this type of requirement, monitoring requirement, is somewhat similar to what we've done with our mining regulations over the years. For mulch facilities, when this went to the Board of County Commissioners in February, mulch facilities was treated in terms of the proposed ordinance the same as concrete batch plants and demolition debris. I think during the board discussion, there was, again, maybe a more narrow list of concerns for expanding the existing mulch facility or putting in a new one, for instance, nearby. So what staff is proposing with the proposal before you is to have mulch facilities, new ones or expansions, be treated as an administrative permit with staff and P&Z review, keeping the what was originally proposed a 300-foot separation from residential, type A buffer where it's near residential, dust control, fire prevention, and spill contingency plans, but not the other best management practices that are appropriate for any concrete plant proposal or demolition debris. Now, regarding the aesthetic upgrade requirement, the overlay regulations do have a requirement for an appearance upgrade. There are 7 junkyards that front 45th Street. A number of reasons why, in staff's view, this is an important regulation. One is 45th Street is Gifford's main street, not just east of 43rd Avenue, but between 43rd Avenue and 58th as well. And in staff's opinion, it's unlikely that those establishments would trigger come in and have to be brought up to standard with a redevelopment proposal. A lot of them have been in operation for a number of years, and although they may have new owners and have gone through some cleanup, which has been good in the last several years, again, no other, unless this type of regulation is put into effect, there's nothing that's going to trigger a requirement that we see on the horizon for any of those. Also, just pointing out that for 45th Street, east of 43rd Avenue, the county is committed and has provided funds and is actually in the middle of a design exercise to look at installing landscaping along 45th Street east of 43rd Avenue. So the county's kind of focusing on that portion of 45th Street. A couple of pictures that I did want to show to illustrate what we're talking about. This is west of 43rd Avenue, looking from the south, looking north and east. And if you could see zoning lines out in the field, which of course they're imaginary, you can't really see them. The IG zoning line would be about here. IL, the rest of this junkyard. This junkyard is grandfathered in, and this is the Gaddis Capital site. What you see here and what's typical in a lot of the junkyards was when they were developed back in the 60s and 70s, the only requirement was for an 8-foot opaque fence. That could have consisted of anything. Could have consisted of screening, could have consisted of boards, it could have consisted of corrugated metal. And we probably had a number of materials used to meet that old requirement. The new requirement would be some landscaping in front of a fenced area or an option to put in an aesthetic wall. And I can tell you that one thing that's been positive, very recently the owner of this property here, Gaddis Capital, has applied for administrative approval and a permit for an aesthetic 8-foot wall, which would replace that. But again, the option in the proposal is for landscaping to essentially kind of hide an existing fence or to go with the aesthetic wall. And an example, a really good example of the aesthetic wall is something that's been in for a few years now. the owner of Mr. Scrap replaced his old wall with this 8-foot aesthetic wall. It has texture, it has lines, it has caps on it. And I think that the benefits are very obvious aesthetically, but also I think security, and there's some other reasons why the owner decided to do that, and appearance as well. I suppose it's been good for business. One other thing that I wanted to point out that's important, and another change to the regulation that's in front of you that we did not have at the board on February 18th. One of the things that we wanted to make sure of is that this requirement to put in landscaping or to put in a wall would not infringe on the property owner's right to continue to use these grandfathered-in parking areas that are vital for the way they've got things laid out right now. They wouldn't be allowed under a brand-new development, but it's vital to their business to have the parking there along kind of their fence area. So the requirement has a specific provision that would not be infringed upon. And we think it can work. It can work in narrow areas, either option. Again, back to the aesthetic wall option. Now, there are, again, 7 junkyards that front 45th Street. There's the Mr. Scrap that we just saw the picture of complies already, 342 feet, the most frontage, actually, of any of the junkyards there. Gaddis Capital has applied for a wall. That's the one that I showed you on the preceding picture, 210 feet of frontage. Grutus Wall, they've actually discussed the option of coming in with the wall and indicated that they would seriously consider doing the aesthetic wall as well. There are 4 other sites ranging in 145 to 165 feet of frontage. Now, in terms of the costs of the upgrade, staff's research indicates that about $2,000 per 100 feet of frontage would be the cost for putting in a native hedge of plants. We think native is what would be needed here to be very drought tolerant, and so just kind of temporary irrigation could get it established. 4 oak trees and a mulch bed. So for a 145-foot site with 145 feet of frontage, the cost would be about $2,900. A 250-foot site would be about $5,000. Now, the wall option, it's a lot more expensive, and yet we've seen obvious interest from some owners to pursue that option. An 8-foot tall CMU block wall, which has to, at 8 feet, it has to meet wind loading requirements. A lot more expensive, $15,000 to $25,000 per 100 feet. A precast panel wall sort of system would be cheaper. We're still trying to gather information on that, but those are the basic options and the basic costs that staff has found. The process for the overlay district is this public hearing this evening, and then there will be 2 public hearings required before the Board of County Commissioners, a first reading, first hearing, and then a second adoption hearing. A couple of things that I do want to point out that's in your packet. I wanted to note that in your attachment that has the draft regulations itself, I want to just, there was one error. Demolition debris sites are currently a special exception use. I mentioned this earlier. And so that wouldn't be changing from permitted to special exception. It's already a special exception, but we would be adding criteria to it. Again, we'll correct this before it goes to the Board of County Commissioners. Also, in Attachment 8, wanted to clarify, and it's explained this way in the staff report, that the regulations for demolition debris sites and concrete batch plants are essentially the same entire list of best management practices would apply. And then we misspelled porous on the attachment 9, top of page 1, so we'll correct that. Staff's recommendation is that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend that the Board of County Commissioners adopt the proposed overlay regulations, and I'd be glad to try to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you very much, Stan, and thank you to everybody at the county. I know you guys have been working on this for 5 years, and very good work. Are there any commissions before we open? Any commissioners who have any questions of staff before we open up the public hearing?
Yeah, and maybe you touched on this, Stan. What are the differences between the Board of County Commissioners' suggestions and the draft overlay regulations that have been put forth this evening?
Well, the differences are mulch facilities, instead of being special exception, would be administrative permit. So there it wouldn't be as high of a standard for them. They wouldn't have the demonstrate compatibility and so forth. They would have the specific criteria, though, that relate to fire, dust control, and spill contingency. And again, the reason why staff is proposing this is based on input from the board. I felt that the fire protection especially was the main concern they had. And just to give you a little bit of history, again, on the mulch facility that's there, it's been there for over 20 years. And toward the end of the life that it knew under the first operator, it got very messy. The piles, it essentially became a de facto landfill. Debris was coming in, nothing was going out. That's totally different under the current operator, who's been operating for a number of years. Sure. Since that time, fire department has come up with standards for pile sizes and dimension and access and water, where you need water for those kinds of uses, and the current owner has done a good job of keeping those, what currently are, I'd say, recommendations. So that's the main difference is in the mulch facilities. I would also say that we added the kind of the protection language for existing junkyard owners, that their parking areas that are grandfathered in would not be adversely impacted by the appearance or the appearance upgrade. Those are the two areas.
Yeah, and on another note, I would just like to hear maybe from Bill on just the outcome and the results of the mediation.
Thank you, Mr.
In a summary form.
When we were doing the group meetings, it was pretty clear that the sides just weren't communicating their thoughts in a matter that it would get us anywhere. And so what I did is just broke the sides apart and tried to figure out and tried to listen as far as what each side was interested in and what was most vital to them and what they wanted to take away with it. And I think that's when we started to come to the realization that, well, no, nobody's really going to come and put a paper mill in the middle of the West Gifford area because there's no water. And no, nobody really wanted adult entertainment facilities, or they weren't going to put a steel mill in there because it just wasn't feasible. There wasn't enough land, there weren't enough resources that were there. And once we stepped back and took a look at what was coming out and what might be coming in, especially uses for the future, I think the sides were able to agree that the overlay was the correct way to go, retaining the existing uses and keeping a close eye as to what might be coming in the future. And so after a series of meetings, we decided to go forward with the overlay, and with Stan's suggestion and help especially, the product is what you see tonight.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Stan, I have a question for you. Are there any other examples? I seem to dimly remember something about when we did a corridor plan for signage and upgrading the signage for McDonald's and stores like that. But are there any other examples that we have in the county where we have compelled a business or an existing property owner to, spend $25,000 without their not coming in with a new a change of use or a major upgrade to their site? Right. I mean, would we have? Is there a precedent for that?
We did. I wouldn't say it's $25,000, and I would say $25,000 in this case if somebody chooses the option of a wall. Obviously, landscaping's less, but yes, for non
2 to 25 per 100 square feet
in the State Road 60 corridor. The non-conforming signs that were out there that were taller and not monument style, they were single pole. We had a 5-year amortization in there that they could keep the signs that they had. They either had to replace them or they had to do some kind of pedestal foundation work and try to screen it as best they could with landscaping. So that was a requirement, whether they came in and redeveloped or not. And actually, in a number of cases, especially with banks, they all went to brand new signs. They had new branding that came out every so many years, and so they changed to monument style signs. And so we did have that requirement in State Road 60.
Okay. It seems to me that of the two, and I guess I'm thinking about this in terms of the neighborhood. I mean, I think it would be my strong preference that there would be a wall rather than landscaping, only because landscaping requires maintenance. But I understand there's a big cost difference. Has anyone proposed anything that would be that the county could help out with in a financial way to make it happen faster, or to help subsidize the cost of perhaps a wall going in, before the end of this year, as opposed to landscaping going in before 2016. Is there any way that could occur? Is there any ideas about that?
Well, it's probably a dangerous thing to have a planner involved with money things. So I just want to start off with that caution. So, but no, there's not. Again, the county is committed to east of 43rd Avenue, putting in landscaping there. But again, not with this current proposal. Not discussed.
Any precedent ever before of any kind of helping a property owner out with some kind of change that the county thought was a good one?
Not an aesthetic upgrade. In this case, what we're talking about is not. It would not be landscape. It's on somebody's private property. In other words, where the county and other municipalities or local governments have done landscaping along roadways, it's been within right of way. In this case, it doesn't make sense to put landscaping right by the edge of the pavement because that's the pull-off parking area for these junkyards.
Right.
So it really needs to go on their property, and putting improvements on a private property, it's not the same as doing it in county right of way.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, I think as far as county help would be concerned, the one thing that kind of jumps to my mind would be the possibility of reuse water and make it available or make it at lower cost if they wanted to go the landscaping route, to have reuse water available for their landscaping rather than potable water. I don't know of any precedent where that has been done before, but that would be one concession that I think the county could help out with.
That's a good one, but I'm actually thinking, what I'm trying to think about is how can we get a wall sooner rather than landscaping later? I would almost want to encourage the wall going, with interest-free loans or whatever the difference is in the cost between the wall and the landscaping. There's going to be some grant program. I'm just thinking out loud right now. But anything that would incentivize the property, we're putting a big expense on potentially an expense on a private property owner. What can we do to help them that would also help the community get a wall up sooner? Because that's got a permanence to it. It has a lot lower.
So is your fear that landscape would not accomplish that goal?
I think landscaping probably accomplishes that goal. Our landscaping codes are very, very good. It's just landscaping requires maintenance.
Yeah.
A wall is good. Those are just my thoughts for now. And any other questions or comments before we open the public? Okay, so we are going to open the public hearing now. It's open. And so what I'll ask you to do, you're all welcome to be heard here tonight. I have found in my experience here on the Planning and Zoning Board, and I think I can speak for all of the commissioners, that if you're clear and succinct, that is usually the most persuasive to us, I think, normally. So when you come to the podium, please just state your name and address for the record and speak your mind. So who would like to come up here first? Anyone? Good evening.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Marcy Oppenheimer-Nolan. I'm an attorney with Becker and Polyakoff. I'm here tonight representing the Progressive Civic League of Gifford. I've been fortunate to be involved in this process for almost 3 years, not as long as Stan and Bill. But we've been, the Progressive League hired me about 2.5 years ago when they started discussions with the property owners. My background is in planning. I'm an urban planner by training, and I also specialize in land use and the writing of land development codes. So I kind of came in to try to help the Gifford community understand the proposal, the negotiations, the give and take, the pros and cons of both sides. So I've seen this through the eyes of Stan and Bill for the last few years. I just want to say that we want to thank staff for all their hard work. This was not an easy task. I was at that meeting when Bill had to become the mediator. I think the hardest part is this language is a very technical language. When we talk about zoning, we talk about uses, and we talk about tables of permitted uses and special exceptions. If you're a business owner or a single-family homeowner, this is not your realm. This is not the area that you live in. So it was very, we had to really simplify and take it down to the base level. And what we came away with is not a plan that I think everyone's jumping up and down and this is going to be transformed into a beautiful little quaint neighborhood anytime soon. But what we really did is identify what were the main issues. And from the residents of Gifford, the main issues really were compatibility. How do we take this existing industrial area that's not going to change? The people that own those are businesses that have been there as long as the single-family homes have been there. And how do we just make it more compatible compatible over time. So our idea was to add more uses that helps with some of the property rights issues that may come up over time. Get consensus on the uses that people all said they wanted to go away and do away with. And then how do we start addressing the, not to say low-hanging fruit, but how do we start addressing the simple things that we can do to make our neighborhoods work together? Simple things are landscaping, walls. I mean, that picture said 1,000 words. When you put a buffer between a use, now all of a sudden as you're driving through your community, you don't really care what's on the other side of the wall because you know health, safety, and welfare issues are being addressed by the county. What you want to do is create a seamless community. If you noticed on the map, to the east is residential, to the west is residential. You drive down 2 neighborhood roads through this industrial area. The newer developments that have come online really do, they're not perfect, they're not white picket fences, but they are not a green chain link fence. So those were really the issues that our community and our association really focused on. And that was the uses that were the most concern, the batch plant, demolition, debris, and mulch. And the solution that staff came up with and that the county commissioners suggested is something we can live with, and we think it will actually help protect our community in the long haul and help protect the existing industrial users in that area as well. And then the idea of the amortization of the wall and the landscaping and the fencing and the setbacks. We think those are wonderful ways in the next 5 and 10 years that we're going to see this area really transform. So we're here tonight. Some of us are going to have comments as well. I'm here to answer any questions you all may have, but we are in support of the ordinance before you, or the draft before you tonight, and we just want to thank the county commission, all their staff for all the work, and the property owners as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening. My name is Kathleen Yaskolski. I live at 5211 Eleuthera Circle, and this is a community that's adjacent to the property in question. And honestly, I stand in disagreement with this recommendation from staff, and I'd like to have a few minutes to explain why. When we look at this 163-acre plot of land that has been zoned IG since 1957, it occurs to me that the problem that we have is not unique to Vero Beach. It's not a new problem. It's a problem that county commissioners are facing everywhere in the United States, probably every day of the week. It's a problem where zoning a half a century ago made sense, and now the community has grown and it no longer makes sense. So on the one hand, we're trying to hold on to something that happened in 1957, and we've outgrown that formula. If you saw, as I saw when you looked at Stan's presentation, that 163-acre area is now surrounded by residential communities. It is not out there. I'm sure in 1957, this 163-acre parcel was out in West Heaven, and nobody could imagine that there would be anything wrong with putting a concrete plant in that area because it wasn't going to interfere with the quality of life of the people in that area. Now today, it is encircled by residential community. And so we're being asked to agree to continuing heavy industrial zoning in an area that is surrounded by residential communities. I do think the foremost responsibility of the county commissioners is to protect the health and safety and welfare of the community residents. And I cannot imagine how this proposal protects all of us in terms of the quality of air. I'd like to point out why I'm saying that. In our area, in staff reports, there's an exhibit where, attachment 5, the point is made that over a third of the IG area in our county, in the unincorporated county, is in the West Gifford area. Now, that's the undeveloped IG. We have in our area a brown zone, 2 of the 3 county dumps, 7 junkyards, Cemex, tarmac, concrete processing plants that are about a mile away from this 163-acre parcel, a community asphalt plant. So when we look at all of what we already have in the community, we have more than our share of dirty industry. And so this proposal that would allow, by exception, concrete processing, drywall, demolition debris, the A1 Wally type of operation to be located in our community, in our residential community, I find offensive. And I can't understand why we would even consider something like that, given the fact that this is now surrounded by residential communities, people who have houses, children, schools, churches. This is not West Heaven anymore. This is a residential community, and we have to look at it for what it is. Now, whoever these individuals are who own the 163 acres, whether it's one man, 5 men, 100 men, I cannot understand how their rights trump our rights for clean air, a quiet community to live in, to go to school, to work, to raise our children. I can't understand how we could make that kind of agreement. The original agreement, our proposal from the community was, let's zone it light industrial. Yes, let's have business, let's have commerce, let's have stores, let's provide jobs. But why on earth would we allow a process that would allow A1 Wally type of business to move into our community when this commission said A1 Wally was a health hazard to the other community? I can't understand why that would be good enough for us. And I would ask the commission to be consistent in that kind of consideration. It presented a health concern to those residents. It presents a health concern to us. Now, lastly, I would like to say that on the idea of best practices, being the regulator, we all know best practices is not a codified term. There's no regulation. If I say best practices and you say best practices, we could have two different ideas of what that means. It's not codified. There's no law. There's no regulation. There's no enforcement. It's like, what is the latest good idea? And somebody could say, well, I don't think that's a good idea, or that's no longer a contemporary practice, so I'm not going to comply with that. So it doesn't reassure me when you say that we're going to allow these businesses to come into our residential community, but we'll regulate them with an overlay process called best practices. It's not convincing to me, and I'm sorry that I don't understand it in that way, but I wanted to share with you my feelings on that. So, you know, I think that we've outgrown the zoning. I think that it's the duty of county commissioners to update zoning in relation to what the current environment is. Communities change. It's not new. I regret that it's taken 5 years to wrestle with this, but I don't think that it's that hard. I think that communities wrestle with these decisions every day of the week throughout America. Communities grow. Zoning gets outdated, and we have to adapt to that. And I would ask the Commission to rule in favor of the residents of the community, consider our health, our welfare, the health and welfare of our children, our churches, our schools, our community, as you're making this decision. I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Joe Outlet III. I live at 4570 57th Avenue. Kathy gave us a good presentation. But I'm here before you today as a member of, as the president of the Progressive Civic League of Gifford. We want to thank you and your staff for working with us and our neighbors over the last several years. We are in support. Before I say that, I want to say, when I speak to people and everything, I tell people all the time that it would be nice if we lived in a fair world, but I know that we don't live in a fair world. So, and in spite of that, I guess I still have to make it. And we are in support of the proposed staff language. As you are aware, West Gifford is an area containing both single-family homes and heavy-duty industrial uses, and the ability to add more incompatible industrial uses. We came into this process scared of what was evolving in our neighborhood and trying to figure out some way to peacefully coexist with our industrial neighbors. We have attended all the meetings held by the county. We have continued to communicate with our residential members. We have been working with our industrial neighbors and have listened to their concerns and modified our initial requests. It is important to note that initially we were vehemently opposed to allowing concrete batch plants, mulch operation, or demolition debris facilities in our neighborhoods. But over time, we realized that regulations aimed at compatibility issues were the most important first steps. We liked the buffer requirements, the landscaping and street tree requirements, the wall requirements, the timing of the improvements. Most of all, we like the fact that the County Commission must approve any special exception for a concrete batch plant, demolition debris facility, or any expansion or new mulch facility coming before this board for review. These facilities will have to meet the strict health, safety, and welfare requirements of the county code. Again, thank you for allowing your dedicated staff to spend so much time to develop regulations that, in our opinion, are a win-win for the entire Gifford community and can serve as a model for other impacted communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Freddie Woolfolk, 4590 57th Avenue, Vero Beach, Florida. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you all. Being a lifelong resident of Indian River County for about years, you know, that's a long time. I'm happy to stand here because this is a great historical moment right now. It's for individuals to feel comfortable enough to be able to come and express their desires and some of their wants. A lot of hard work has went into this process, and the county staff, as well as the county commissioners, the attorneys, the Gifford residents, everyone coming together, and the business owners. It brings to mind what I learned as a former insurance agent. I learned one word, and that word was FORM, F-O-R-M. And that acronym stuck with me throughout my whole career as a professional, and it hit me tonight. Mention FORM. It's very simple. It'll help us to come to some type of agreement that FORM, number one, that F stands for family. That's very important. Everybody cares for their family. Very important that we look out for our future, because when we hand this world over to them, we want to make sure it's a world that they can live and enjoy in, not polluted, not contaminated, not a lot of violence, not a lot of economic downturns. So family is very important. The next thing, when you take a look at the families, you also need businesses, organization for the O. You need the salvage yards. You need the various other businesses along that corridor. I would love, and I'm a shade tree mechanic by unofficial trade, so I love going to Mr. Strap and other places down there to pick up parts from my old 1988 Plymouth Horizon. I enjoy that, and I don't want to see them go away. The only thing I'm asking that those particular organizations have the next alphabet, which is our responsibility. How they discard the fluids, how they make sure the transmission fluid and the gases and other things are taken care of properly. So it can be a coexistence when they can too enjoy a wealthy economical profit. And finally, the M, maturity. We are mature adults. No one is children in this room here. These are adults bringing forth their concerns. And you as commissioners and P&Z commissioners, you have to listen to those concerns, not in any biased fashion, but to listen to make sure that those concerns are taken from their hearts. So with that word, my last thing I'll say here is that Gifford, Indian River County as a whole, is a jewel. And we want to make sure in any part of this county that someone travels through, whether it's Gifford, Oslo, Fellsmere, Vero Beach, Indian River Shores, Orchid, they know they're in Indian River County simply because of the maturity we've shown tonight and making sure that every part of Indian River County is treated fairly. And that's what we're asking now, fairness. Thank you so much.
Very well spoken. Thank you so much, Mr. Wolfert. Anyone else?
Good evening. Tony Brown, 4159 57th Court. First of all, I would like to say that, for the record, we all agree on what Stan has done. And with the overlay, Mr. Ball was real nice with what he said happened in those meetings. It got real nasty and ugly. And you need to know it. And as a community, you need to know some of the stuff that leads to it. My president, Mr. Idlet, said, in a perfect world. I'm kind of like Commissioner Solari said when this first started, put it across I-95. That would be our ultimate dream. That would be what we would want, as Mr. Eilert would say, in the perfect world. But since we can't have a perfect world, this at least is a start. But we want you all to be aware, as well as the county commissioners, that these are our lives. These are our homes. These are our children. We talk about best practices and all of this. We as a community, along you all and the commissioner, we're holding you responsible that best practices work. Because right now you have M&K, where Mr. Bowling can tell you all kind of stuff was done behind a wall, where 55 tons of dirt had to be removed in our community, where we found toxic sites where there was arsenic in the ground. These are the things that, under this overlay, that if you accept it, that we've agreed as a collective group in our community to go along with, that you understand that we're looking for you to make sure that this works. Because it's my grandchildren. I'm over 60. I'm headed out of here, and I know that. But it's my job to make sure that you all understand that my children, my grandchildren, are the ones that have to live in this environment. Or we going to suffer our children for profit. And right now it appears that profit is the thing, because the lawyer for us, she told us the pros and cons. We've accepted the fact that this is the best scenario for now. Hopefully in the future we can revisit this issue. And as Kathy said, bring it forward into the 21st and the 22nd century. Because 1957 is behind us, 1952 is behind us. We thank you for being allowed to come before you with this. We hope you will go with the overlay, but we also want you to know that some people need to be held responsible to make sure that this works for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Donald Hart. I live at 4295 45th Lane. And the ones that came before me, I do agree with what they said tonight. But I'm here to say I am a member of the Progressive Civic League. I'm the vice president of the Progressive Civic League of Gifford. The proposed change is something we have been working with staff, county commissioners, and the surrounding property owners for several years. We thank everyone for their hard work. The county adopted the Gifford Neighborhood Plan in 2000. In that report, specific goals and objectives were identified to contribute to the economic development of the Gifford community. One area identified was the need to develop zoning regulations to increase the compatibility between the existing industrial and residential users of the area. The code change before you today achieves that goal. After many long meetings, like they all said, we had a lot of meetings with both residential and industrial property owners, it was determined that as opposed to focusing on use, which were affordable legal protection, a better strategy was to focus on the area of agreements, such as walls, landscaping, setbacks, and the public hearing process. These changes will make a dramatic impact in the overall economic prosperity of the Gifford area the next few years. I say thank you all for what you all have to do, and I thank everyone that we work together on this project.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is John Marr, and I live on Tulip Lane. I've had the pleasure and opportunity to work with Joe and Attorney Nolan in this process. But I would be less than candid with you if I didn't say that the woman who spoke, Ms. Jakolski, didn't internally express my feelings. However, I am cognizant of the fact of a Bert Harris situation and compromise, and so I think that what the staff and Mr. Bowling have put together is a very reasonable, sensible, thoughtful way to deal with an issue that I wish we didn't have to deal with at all. Zoning is what it is, and it occurred a long time ago. I would urge all of you to be looking prospectively as to how you can make it better and better at Gifford, in Gifford, as time goes on. I was particularly pleased with your thoughts about having perhaps the county come up with some resources to make that happen even more quickly. And I hope it will pass tonight as it's drafted by Mr. Bowling and the staff. But I would hope to leave you with the thought that as resources become available in Vero Beach, in Gifford, that they will be applied in the Gifford community among the top priorities rather than at some other level. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. I'm Keith Tagg. I own Mr. Scrap on 45th Street, 4455 45th Street. I've been to just about all these meetings, heard the pros and the cons, and I really like what you said about maybe helping the people beautify 45th Street and maybe have the county help just a little bit on the funding to make it go a little bit faster. What I don't really understand is how you guys are having a problem with beautifying west of 43rd Avenue, coming up with the money. You want us to do it. I've already done it. Okay? I like it. Anyway, it makes my place a lot better. A lot of people like coming in there. They think it's a professional run place. What I don't understand is, east of 43rd Avenue, how can the county come up with $250,000 to $400,000 to beautify that place? There's no meetings or nothing on that. It's all of a sudden it's just there. Now we're going through 5 years to have, well, 45th Street, that's what I'm concerned about, and they're doing all this overlays to everybody else. And the only thing I'm really concerned about is changing the IG, and evidently that's not going to be changed, which is okay with me. Another thing I want to point out, in River County, it's impossible to do anything here. It took me, 4 to 6 months to get a permit to put up my fence. I had the man that's across the street from me that you guys seen, it's the old ugly blue fence that keeps blowing down, and to me it is an eyesore. He came into my yard 2 or 3 weeks ago and asked me how long and how much of a headache it was for me to get permits for my fence. And I said, first it was 130 mile an hour wind load or something, then 140, and I said, I worked with Stan and we finally got it done. He's been there now, he says, for like 3 months. How come nobody will let him do it? You guys want it so bad, why don't you push it through? Let him do it. The man wants to do it. Let him do it. Well, I don't know what the problem is. You know, you're sitting there saying, let's make it where the county maybe give a little bit to help them. Well, it seems like every time we go to do something, it's a headbutt. And I don't understand it. You know, I mean, Stan, are you aware of this? How long has he been trying to get that fence?
Yeah, a couple things, and Keith brings up some good points. One thing, I think it was unfortunate. I mean, Keith was a leader in putting up an aesthetic wall. It's been a great addition. I think actually the building code changed and the wind loading requirements changed and really
160
and hit him right in the middle where you know he had to comply with it and get it re-engineered, and that took a long time. The current application that's in for site plan review, there's still some issues with establishing what the proper width is for the opening off of the road between where the existing gate is now that will allow traffic in. But again, I think that can get resolved. The other thing I did want to mention, the difference in 45th Street east of 43rd Avenue and west.
Right away.
Right away, exactly. 45th Street west of 43rd Avenue, there's 30 feet of right-of-way, just barely north of the edge of pavement. We can't go into the canal. Just a lot of constraints there. It's at least 60 feet or wider to the east. It's still tight to do landscaping, but we can get some in on the east side. On the west side, and again, a lot of these parking areas that are grandfathered in, they're right off the edge of pavement, right off the right-of-way.
I guess I would suggest that. I guess what I was suggesting, and it's a half-formed idea to be perfectly honest with you, but I truly believe that it probably is a better solution for the community to have a wall, and I know it's a better solution for the community to have a wall sooner rather than later. And if there was some kind of funding mechanism, that is nothing that the P&Z deals with or planners deal with, but I would just say if there was some kind of planning, maybe the county commission would want to consider some kind of creative financing thing that would incentivize a property owner, hey, if you do this within the next 6 months, we will fast track your application and we will, subsidize the expense of the wall, not the landscaping. But this is, but the sale ends on January 1st, 2015, or something to that effect. I'm just making it up, but you kind of get the idea of what I'm driving at.
Dan?
Sure. Yes.
What are the number of impacted businesses with?
Well, with the requirement Mr. Tague has already complied, he has the most frontage, so six. Six
So
other
we're talking
ones
about
that
6
don't
businesses.
currently have up landscaping or a wall. One is proposing, and one has discussed it with staff, but not applied with respect to a wall.
I mean, right off the bat, we could waive any fees and we could fast track it.
Well, certainly you all, you're really charged to make recommendations to the board, and you could certainly make that, kind of a parallel recommendation if you wish. And you're correct, there's no mechanism in place right now. It would take board action to put a mechanism like that in place.
Right.
Is that something that could be done?
I think 3 votes will make something happen. That's about all I've learned after 29 years.
Sam, it's a process. It's going to take some time to build and to plan and to get approved a wall.
Sure.
It doesn't happen overnight.
And again, I think anything that's put in place would have to be voluntary, because the only place it makes sense for the wall or the landscaping is on private property. It won't be within the right-of-way. Again, to do it in the right-of-way would block the parking areas, so it has to be a cooperative effort.
No,
to make something available.
It would be a subsidy and it would be an inducement to do it sooner.
Incentivizing it.
The board could certainly look at it, and you obviously have to be consistent and make a finding as to why it needs to happen here, and certainly.
Okay, thank you.
There's a couple other things I want to say.
Please do. Thank you.
Every time I come here, I get these people coming up and saying, gee, it's all residential area now around this IG. IG's been there since, I guess, 1957. I've been at Mr. Scrapp for 19 years. I've seen it grow. And the thing that I don't understand for the life of me is if I'm going to retire someplace, or I want to go find someplace where I have a nice community, nice churches, nice schools for my kids, and so on, I'm going to do a little bit of investigation on where I'm going to put this house, where I'm going to raise my family, where my grandkids are going to be. Why in the world would somebody that don't want any heavy industrial or anything buy a house there, or build a house, or development? Back in the boom, around that area, it was groves. Citrus took a bad hit. These developers went in there and bought all these groves. They put nice housing communities in there. And sure enough, people moved in. And now all of a sudden, people are starting to complain. Well, that's understandable too. And I do agree with a lot of them about this concrete plant and stuff like that. But from my understanding, these meetings I'm going to, you guys, what passes through here is going to make it so, sure, it's going to be there, but there ain't no way you guys are going to let it go in, because you're just going to vote it down. All these regulations that you got, it will not be affordable. I don't remember the guy that bought the trailer park to build this plant, but he said that in these meetings before, that by the time he filled in the canal and he did all the road work and all that stuff, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it wouldn't have been feasible in the first place. But everything that you guys are saying on these 3 things that the community and people don't want, I think it's understandable that it just ain't going to happen anyway. And I don't know if the people realizes that or not, or if they looked at it. It just ain't going to happen anyway. And the textile plants and all that stuff, and I did a little bit of research, and it looks like everything on this list requires 300 feet from a residential area. And I don't think in any of that 163 acres, I don't think there's anything within 300 feet that they could actually put one in there, or enough land for anything that's in there anyways. Anyway, that's about all I got to say.
Thank you. Thank you for your observations and thoughts.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Stan, could you expedite permitting of a wall? Would it be possible?
I think when you talk expediting is very practical in theory, but you have to get the right, and it's not the review time. It's getting the proper information. When you're dealing with the building code, the reviewer can't speed up getting engineered plans that show that it meets it. So you can expedite the review time and say, we're going to get it done in 24 hours. We're going to have somebody review this plan. But I can tell you my experience has been not every time, but a lot of times the process is getting the correct submittal in the first place in terms of engineering wind loading, especially for an 8-foot wall. So yeah, I mean we can guarantee review times, and that's not nothing, but it's not. It's probably not as much of a compression in the time as people might like to think.
I mean, my thought would be that this is something that the government is imposing upon them. Now they run up against government. If we can soften the blow as much as possible, I think almost anything would be a help.
Certainly, we make people do things all the time, though. I mean, to make them come in and get a permit in the first place is making them do something. So it's just a matter of prioritizing.
Thank you. I just my name is Kathleen Muskolsky at 5211 Eleuthera Circle. I do have one more comment I wanted to share, and that is that relative to the idea that it's just not going to happen, I would like to point out, in case you haven't seen it yet, that just today we were notified that Hinkle Precast and Concrete has made an administrative approval application in this area, and this just happened today. So this is happening. This is not something that's not going to happen. It is happening, and it's happening right under our feet, right as we speak. And in case anyone thinks it's not happening, I just want to call that to your attention. It is.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a comment?
Yes, please do, Mr.
It is not happening. The Hinkle proposal is precast concrete, pouring concrete members for different things. It's proposed as a permitted use in these regulations. It is not a concrete batch plant. It is not a cement plant. It's
not manufacturing concrete.
It's a site where concrete is delivered periodically to poured into form for cast structures. And the same kinds of uses have actually occurred for structural members for construction purposes in this area, for tire stops back in previous years.
It's a permitted use.
Is a cast. It's not. It does have concrete in it because just like if you pour a driveway, it has concrete.
Just like you pour a slab at a home.
Yes, that's correct. So I just wanted to get that out in the public. It is not happening with the application that was approved. Totally different use.
They're going to be pouring lintels, concrete window sills, tie beams, things like that, continuous beams. They're not actually going to be.
It's a very, very substantial difference between a concrete factory when they're manufacturing concrete with the dust and everything else and crushing rock and all that kind of stuff, and concrete trucks pouring up and then pouring them into forms. Okay, I'm glad you're clear on that. Yes, your name and address for the...
Jeff Thompson, 2327 Seville Avenue, Vero Beach. How y'all doing?
Just great.
I've been living through this for the last 5 years and sat in on a lot of the meetings. And I'm currently one of the owners of Vero Millwork, Indian River Industrial Center, which takes up about 8% of that 163 acres that is in discussion. We certainly don't have an issue certainly giving up textile plants and paper mills and stuff like that. A few things I have a problem with, like Mr. Scrapp was talking about, and Sam, you mentioned, is making mandatory improvements on existing businesses, making people spend money that whether they've got it or not. And I'm not in that situation, but I feel for the people over on 45th Street that somebody's holding their feet to the fire, and it's like having to go buy health insurance or something like that. You have to go do it. Somebody's telling you have to go do it, or you're going to be fined, or we're going to put you out of business. We're going to we're going to run you out on the rail. It's just not right. If you all want it done, the county needs to come up with the funding to help these people. I don't care whether they're making $1 million a day. It's not right to do that, and I'm sure they're not, because if they were smart, they'd be retired. In a way, this is almost setting a bad precedence, because the lady that was just speaking, she's very passionate. I understand that. She heard about this concrete casting, and oh my gosh, the bells and whistles went off. But we're getting into that not in my backyard. And, out of those 163 acres, here's my business card. I'd be more than happy to sell every square foot of property I got right now if somebody wants to stroke a check. If we could talk Joe Baird into it, Bill, can you get a private meeting with him? Just say, hey, everything's for sale.
I'll let you take care of that.
Okay,
Jeff.
thanks.
You're
In regards to the new uses and added uses, are these over-the-counter permitted uses, or they've got to go through all the government regulations, whether we got to go before planning and zoning and got to go before county commission? Stan, do we have...
They're permitted uses, which means they have to go through the site plan process.
Site plan approval.
And probably in most cases that's going to be staff level approval, but you're right, TRC, the whole bit.
Okay. I spoke to my realtor about it, and he looked at this list and he said, well, most of these are retail. And I get it, and I'm happy to have more zoning opportunities. However, it's easy to take an IG zoning and downzone it into heavy commercial, or I don't know, some of these things.
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you think it would be appropriate for a concrete manufacturing plant to be in this area?
That's certainly not. I'm
just trying to understand, where you are on this. I understand your frustration, definitely.
And I'm more so frustrated because it's taken 5 years to get to this point.
Yeah.
This has been so long and drawn out. There's a property owner that's not here, and he's extremely passionate about this. He had a deal fall through because, as he put it, there was a cloud hanging over this 163 acres. He had somebody that maybe wanted to buy his business, and the guy was like, well, I'd like to have that industrial property. However, I don't know what I can do with it. We need to get this thing off dead center. I know where it's going. This is going back to the Board of County Commissioners, and it's going to be voted on in 5-0. It's a slam dunk. This is a foregone conclusion as far as I'm concerned.
Do you think it's a fair compromise? Setting aside the 5 years of frustration and brain damage.
I think making people do things and spend money.
That's where you have
I have a real hard time with that.
I understand that.
I really do. When the government steps up and says, you're going to do this, or we're going to drive you out of business, or whatever. Or what is it, you can't be there? Or we're going to come padlock your business? Or we're going to send a sheriff's deputy over to sit in front and just not let you into your business?
So you're in agreement that to one extent or the other, the government ought to make funds available to incentivize these property owners?
I think if the government wants it done, the community wants it done, the government needs to figure out how to do it for these people. It's just the way it should be. I mean,
I understand.
And do you have any issue with the heavy use that were taken off the table?
I've sat in a lot of meetings. I know we're not going to have paper manufacturing because they need to be sitting on a river. You need millions of gallons a day to run it through. Same with steel manufacturing, tire manufacturing. There's not a parcel big enough to put any one of those plants on there. I don't have a problem giving up this stuff. It's those devil in the details that I've got a little problem with, and it's just not right. And that's all I got to say. But I'd be more than happy to sell the property I have, and somebody could come and put an umbrella stand on it. I wouldn't care. I understand we are surrounded, and it's a problem. Like she said, it's a problem everywhere. You know, the community grows, and the community's trying to thrive, and we all want a great place to live. And Vero's, it doesn't get any better than Vero Beach. I've been around the state, and this is truly paradise. And I know what's happening. I know what they're dealing with. But like Mr. Scrap said about the landscaping, you know, you come up with money landscaping, and I know it's a setback issue and parking issues, but somebody needs to. You all got a lot of smart people that sit up there and planning, and you all can figure it out. We've gotten 5 years, and I know it's more than one piece of paper, but 5 years worth of a lot of heartache, and I bet the county spent $200,000 on this. I bet there's a $200,000 investment in this with all the time and energy that's gone into this. And all I can say is I just hope we think this thing through, because you know it could set a precedence. You know, when it was before the county commission, there was somebody that came up and said, well, you know, I really don't want to stop at 43rd Avenue. I'd like to see if we can go down and get rid of the packing plants down on Old Dixie Highway. And I was like, I mean, come on, we got to be reasonable with this. We got to think about this. I mean, you want to talk about affecting thousands of jobs with the packing houses down there. That's all I got to say. And I appreciate y'all's time. Y'all have a good evening. I'm going to go home and have dinner.
So far, so good.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good evening.
Tony Esposito, 624 23rd Street, Southeast. I'm in Gifford. I have a salvage yard, same as Keith. And I'm here 38 years, probably more than most of you. But one thing I want to say, everybody is sincere, and everybody has their right to say their piece. The only difference between me and the other two property owners that just spoke is that it hurts our pocketbook. Does it hurt yours? No. Do you have a retirement? Yes. We had to serve and make our own retirement. I'm retired now, but I'm still there. I'm in Gifford every day. And everybody in Gifford knows me. I'm the white mayor. And you know who the black mayor is. But I'm going to tell you something. We always got along. Never had a problem until now. But this problem arose not from now. It started way back. Just that everybody ignored it. I suggested in one of the meetings, the past 4 or 5 years, to widen Gifford Road, 45th Street, Martin Luther King Boulevard. Buy one house north of 45th Street. What's it going to cost? What are them houses worth? $60,000? What are we talking? $4-5 million? Widen the road? Make sidewalks. There's no sidewalks there. These people are talking about looks. What's looks? They don't even have a sidewalk to walk on. The kids don't have a sidewalk to walk on. They just did 45th Street. They should be ashamed of themselves. Really. To spend that money and not even have a sidewalk. Me? I'd put a piece of plywood there to make the people walk. If anything. That's what I would do. I'd put asphalt down. Anything that the kids could walk on it. You talking about kids walking to school on Gifford? All right, they got buses, but you want to know something? I got a piece of property just north of 45th, and I got one on 50. I walk that. I walk it every day. I got to walk in the street because the dirt is too hard to walk on at my age. The money they raised, and then they broke my sewer pipe and it cost me $42,000. Out of here. That hurts. I'm sure you know that by now. We're in bad times. Our profits are down almost 50%. Now you want me to spend more money? I have to. Because you guys, when you sign that, you know what Obama said? I got the pen. That's where you guys stand now in the county. That's where you stand. I hope you do the right thing. I know you can't pacify both of us. You can't pacify both sides. But one thing I want to say, it hurts here. That's where it hurts. Half of these people I spoke, I don't think even live in Gifford. I don't even know them. I don't know. But one thing I will say, I know I have a lot more to lose. I bought a gold, and you're turning it into, you want to turn it into iron. Is that legal? I was a building official and a builder and a property owner, property and real estate investor all my life. I'm 83 years old. Never seen nothing like this. And there's no way that you could pacify both sides. There's no way. I just wish you luck.
Thank you. Mr. Esposito, I'm sorry can I ask you a quick question? Would you mind coming back up to the Mr. Esposito? Just as a point of clarification, just so I understand better, when you're talking about it hurting you in the pocket, are you mainly talking about the requirements for the wall or the landscaping that would have to go in front of your property?
No, as far as looks go, is one thing.
Yeah.
Personally speaking,
yes, sir.
and I talked to some of these gentlemen here, I don't want to mention names.
Yeah.
I spoke to them. The problem isn't looks. It ain't looks. It's drugs and stuff like that. That's the problem.
When you were talking about how it's going to hit you in the pocket, it's going to hit you in the pocket, is what you were talking about, is the cost of the construction of a wall or the cost of the landscaping? Is that what you mean about how it's going to hit you in the pocket?
Well, let me put it to you. I told you, I just spent $42,000 because my parking lot happens to be over the drainage that goes to the ocean. So the county told me, in fact, I got a lot of friends in Gifford, in Vero, and they told me, you know what they told me? Don't do nothing. If it does collapse and somebody does get hurt, the county will come in and rip my whole parking lot up. That's what they told me.
Okay.
And it wouldn't cost me nothing. Now I got to replace the pipe. At least it will cost me half the work. The only difference with that is the business got to be closed.
Okay.
And they know that.
Right.
So that hurts here.
I understand.
So it's better if it hurt half here and half here, and get do it and be quiet about it. How much lumps could you take?
I understand.
We just spent another $50. I've invested over $100,000 in my property this year, past 2 years. How much taxes I pay? I pay more than the whole one row of houses on 45th Street.
Okay, I understand.
Does that make any difference? Does that make any say?
I think it does.
I think so. I sympathize with the people. But remember one thing. I was there before any house except the house on 43rd, on the corner, 43rd and 45th. It was the only house and the trust plant that was there when I got here. They knew what they were buying. They knew the junkyards were across. They loved us. I serviced them for 38 years. I know these people.
Thank you.
Half of them are dead. Well,
thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Crystal Boujal. I live at 8 Vista Garden Trails, number 102. I have lived in Gifford, and I do serve Gifford in a number of ways, especially with the children. I'm from California, and I've been listening to the comments of people who have businesses in Gifford, and I appreciate their comments. I've listened to the Progressive Civic League and their position, and I've observed how you have responded to what we're saying about the community of Gifford. First thing I want to do is just say how thrilled I am and how proud I am to be a part of the Gifford community, even though I don't live there. And the reason I'm extremely proud of that is because history has played a role in keeping communities separated in a certain way here in Indian River County. And in that historical context, people in Gifford have not been able to express themselves as fully and as thoroughly and as emotionally and as truthfully and as honestly as they would like to because of fear of retribution. And you might say, well, that's in the past. But people in Gifford have developed coping skills so that it would be protective of their jobs, their children's school arrangements, and anything else that they do in Vero Beach. We're not as free as the newspaper says we are. But the people that were here tonight have spoken very clearly. And I understand in the 5 years they have expressed themselves very clearly, angrily. And I'm glad that you did, because you gentlemen need to know that as time continues, we will speak up more and more. And I'm appreciating how you are responding to us, listening and listening thoroughly. It's the only way we're going to get over the hurdle that we currently have, where we don't really understand each other's plight. As I'm listening to the businessmen, as one gentleman said, you can't satisfy both sides. That's true. But he also said that he has lived in the community for a long time, and there were no houses there. But years ago, if people in Gifford could have lived anywhere they wanted to in Indian River County, they may not have settled around his business. There are certain restraints, certain circumstances that kept people in Gifford from moving out into anywhere, even today. Price, guarded communities, gated communities. I mean, we don't want to live where we're not wanted. We want to live where we're comfortable and safe and secure and loved. And that may or may not be the case anywhere in Indian River County. I now live in luxury projects in Vista Gardens. And I'm safe because there are other people there to make sure that I'm safe. But my heart is in Gifford because that's where I'm loved. Again, I just want to say that I'm appreciative of the way you have responded. I'm appreciative of the staff for spending 5 years listening. But I'm ultra proud of the people from Gifford who have taken the time and given you the trust of their emotions and their feelings and their thoughts. And we'll give you more as time goes on so that you can know more about what our heart's desires are, so that you can address them from a heart standpoint. Yes, we love the businessman who spoke a minute ago. That's just our nature. We love our enemies. It's just our nature. And we do love what you are doing, but not what you're doing for us, but what you're doing with us. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. This public meeting's still open. Would anyone else like to speak this evening? Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Lottie Nicholson, and I live at 4526 49th Avenue, and that is west, maybe a half a mile west, no, not west, east of the place that they want to put the cement plant, or whatever they call it. And I do want everyone to know that I do live in Gifford. And I do live in the area where if the wind blows when the cement plant is there, I and my family and my friends and the community and the children that go to Dodgertown Elementary and the different ones that live in that area will be breathing the dangerous dust, and we'll have lung problems and sicknesses, and plants won't grow, and it will not be a successful place. And it won't be good for our children to live there when we die. Because we will die eventually. Because we'll be living in an unhealthy environment. And I could not sit there and listen to what is being said and not speak and say, I appeal to you, I beg you to please consider us that live in Gifford, that were born and raised in Gifford, because I was born and raised in Gifford, native born Vero Beechin. And I'm proud of where I live, but I want to continue to be proud of where I live. I want to bring my family members here that live abroad. I want to bring my family here that lives in Jamaica, that is visiting me presently from Jamaica. I want to be proud, and I am proud of my community. So I say to you, please, let us live. You wouldn't want that in your community. You don't want the health problems. You don't need it. We don't need it. We love you all, and we appreciate you all. Give us a chance. Please don't let it happen. Please, give us a chance. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak while the public hearing is still open? I'm going to close the public hearing with a comment. Thank you all so much for telling us what's on your hearts and minds this evening. It really was quite moving, and you all did a great job, and it was great. And also, I want to reiterate to the staff what I heard everyone say was just what a really incomparable job you guys have done mediating this for the past 5 years. And it sounds like everyone on all sides of this issue seem to really have genuine appreciation for all the time and effort you've put into it. So kudos to you as well. Is there any discussion? Are there any questions that fellow commissioners would have, or statements they would like to make about this?
Stan, is there any way staff might be able to put up is there any way staff might be able to put together a packet that might help expedite this permitting process? So maybe it's something these guys can take directly to their engineers that have all the standards. I mean, just something that's easy, somebody can come and pick up from you guys and just save some time.
Certainly. I think your comment is, can we try to make it easy for someone to know exactly what to submit for the wall type and so forth? Well, certainly, we can do everything we can to
or
do
maybe
that.
we can even mail out a packet to these particular businesses that are more than likely going to have to put up a wall or the landscape.
We could do that. We could have a meeting with the owners and the building officials, and certainly. We can certainly do that.
What about waiving any fees related to the review or impact fees or anything like that of any improvements they might choose to make?
Yeah, no impact fees required.
Right.
So I think anything to do with waiving fees,
I know it would be at the board level.
It would be, yes, it would
Clearly.
be, because the building department's an enterprise fund, so the money would have to come from somewhere.
I understand.
And that could be part of any recommendation you all want to make.
Yeah, I want to just touch maybe on the property rights analysis and the potential exposure by having property rights be impacted by eliminating use or restricting use. And maybe Bill just can touch on the Burt Harris Act. And I think there seems to be on the resident side a real concern on the three issues and of the demolition, the concrete batch, and the mulch facility. So, if we're going to eliminate those, if we're going to consider to eliminate those uses, there appears to be some level of exposure that the county could incur. So if you would kind of reference that.
We're going to be eliminating some of the traditional heavy industrial uses, such as the paper mills, the steel mills, the tire plants, things like that. Is there a risk as far as the Burt Harris Act? I would say the risk would be very, very low, because there just isn't the amount of property necessary to have a use like that go in here. If you take a look at the Prestige plant application, they came in, they had their staff approval, they did not go forward. If they would come forward now, they would face an additional hurdle, if you will, to have to get their plant approved, not only by Planning and Zoning, but also by the Board of County Commissioners. The burden would be placed on them to go ahead and meet the new requirements in the ordinance, and if they would be denied, at that point they would have to say it's because of the new ordinance that inordinately burdened the property, that they were not able to use it to the extent that they used to be able to use it. There is a risk there. As far as the amount of the risk, it's something that we'd have to consider once an application would be filed. Stan, at this point, their application has expired.
That's correct. And it's been expired for a number of years.
Okay.
Yeah, it's gone.
Right.
And the property is just there.
So this document that we're looking at now does not eliminate the mulch, the concrete demolition, or the debris. It just puts right now the mulch into an administrative permit use.
Correct.
And then the concrete and demolition into a special exemption use.
Special exception use, that's correct.
So it doesn't eliminate it, but it makes it, as you said, it makes it much more difficult.
That's correct, a much more stringent review.
Yeah, and then I think the question that was presented by one of the residents is are those adequate safeguards to protect safety concerns expressed, and that's something for us to make a decision on this evening.
Mr. Chairman, if I could comment, because I do believe it came up in discussion, and I just want, it might be kind of repeating myself, but best management practices are guidelines, but the way that the ordinance is structured is they could become requirements. And that's the key here. The best management practices, as they might apply to demolition debris or concrete plant, is specified in the proposed ordinance that the county may require any that are appropriate. So they would go from being recommendations to being requirements on an application-by-application basis, and that's the way that the ordinance is structured.
Sure, but in these cases, there'll be, again, public notice, public hearings, Planning and Zoning, and Board of County Commissioners.
Correct.
To discuss the same very issues
That's exactly
that were presented
right.
this evening.
That's exactly right.
And our job tonight is just to decide whether this is going to move forward. That this document is going to move forward as proposed or with changes. And I for one cannot envision a concrete rendering plant or a demolition debris plant in this area. And I think the way it's structured right now, it makes it virtually impossible that would happen. I think the fact that this has been a 5-year process, the fact that everybody has come together, that there's been mitigation is just remarkable. And I'm definitely in favor of this moving forward. And I think with the recommendation, and I think you were hinting at the recommendation of some sort of mechanism to help these improvements along 45th Street. And I would favor that being a recommendation if we choose to move forward on this.
As a point of clarification, I just want to say for the record, I do not believe that it is impossible for those uses to go in here. What I would say is that there is a very, very, very high level of scrutiny so that the needs of the neighborhood would be fully addressed before any such thing could ever occur. It is not impossible, but there are so many levels of scrutiny that until really essentially all the needs of the community would be adequately addressed, such a thing probably could not occur, but not impossible. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah. I guess the question, and I was looking at the analysis again related to the improvements of the existing owners. And in reality, while it doesn't infringe on the use of the property owners, but they would look at it as what was presented this evening, that it certainly has an impact on their business. And one gentleman even referenced the fact that he didn't believe that such improvements had their desired consequence and goal. So, I think that is something that, I would probably be still open for some debate. I don't know how you avoid a scenario where they're not going to incur expense. I believe they'll actually incur expense associated with that improvement. But I also concur with many of what was presented again this evening and the fact that these improvements will actually achieve a desired effect in the community. I think it serves the community well by making such improvements. I just don't know how to strike that balance in coming up with proposed suggestions, even for the Board of County Commissioners to consider.
Well, let's talk about it. I mean, my general idea, and maybe we can add a little more to this, would be that the existing requirement that they do either the landscaping or the wall by, what's the date, Stan?
They would actually have to make the improvement by June of 2016.
By June of 2016, it just seems to me that we would leave that in place, that requirement, just as written, but there would be an additional, some sort of financial incentive that would be offered to the property owners that if they would choose to build a wall, that, that there would be some kind of some kind of financial incentive provided by Indian River County, that if they did it quickly, that they would get the benefit of expedited review, a waiver of any fees, and some kind of, financial compensation for doing it by January 1st or March 30th of 2015, a much quicker time frame. It just seems to me that serves everyone's best interest.
Another question that I should have presented was, is there any positive impact by putting that improvement in place from the business standpoint? Obviously, the community looks at it as an improvement, but is there any positive impact from that they would benefit in their business?
I think a few things. I think Mr. Tague touched on it, the one who's done it. I think there's a couple of things. I think it probably improves security. Mm-hmm. I think it improves the look for the business and so forth. And actually, Mr. Tague, who's been there for quite some time, after a storm comes through, he doesn't have to go, pick up pieces of the fence. I mean, it's truly secure. It's there. It's an investment. It's big. I mean, he spent a lot of money doing that, but it's in place and it's not going anywhere. In fact, he's telling me if a big blow comes, he might just crouch down behind the wall. It's not going to go anywhere. It's going to, it won't. It'll literally secures the facility. So I think there are some benefits, some reasons he did it.
Sure, and you could make an argument that you would get a return on investment potentially over time. Certainly, I think an incentive in place makes sense. I'm just not sure how we put that together, even to present to the Board of County Commissioners in that capacity.
Maybe just recommend that there would be some kind of incentive, that it could be some kind of recommendation could be formulated by staff as to what that might look like.
Sure.
Why don't you try it this way? I mean, if there is general consensus amongst the commission as far as expedited review of permits, waiving permit fees, putting a wall package together that can be given out, whatever other ideas that you might have.
And have a time element as well associated with it, because I think what Sam had suggested is looking at that 2016 and certainly accelerated pace would be a good thing
and if
for
you
the
do,
community.
you can have this the existing requirements stay in place, but but if you do a wall and you do it now, there's a package of benefits that would accrue to you to do it that way. And I think it should be a subsidy, some form of subsidy for the expense, the actual out-of-pocket expense for it, as well as the other things that Mr. DeBrawl said. But I cannot make a motion because I am the chairman. So.
And I think that
I understand.
I think the early discussion that you had, I think at one point in the early discussion, when you were going through your free thinking phase, you threw out the possibility of the difference between the vegetative wall and the solid wall.
Or some portion of it.
Or some portion of it, that'd be what the county pick up or help with.
Yeah, so I'll make a motion to approve staff's recommendations in full, and then I think maybe as a separate condition, we address that specific topic.
Separate motion.
So I'll make a formal motion to approve staff's recommendations.
I'll second it.
Emmons and Day.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Is there a second motion?
Yep, so you want to craft that together? Good luck.
Yeah, I'll move that we make a recommendation to the county commission that for these required improvements, the improvements that are required by June of 2016, that the county put together some sort of package that would, number one, expedite the permitting process, number two, waive permitting fees, and number three, in some way help the owners to, with the financial burden of that requirement.
And then number four, have some incentivizing a time element so we can
and number four, have some incentive for a time element.
And this is all for existing businesses, that wasn't said.
Yeah,
that's correct.
And if I could just clear, I think we're talking about the wall, because that's the one that would require the permitting. That's the one that really has the big investment.
That's
the wall. Okay. Not.
Yes. Correct.
So that's a formal motion?
Yes.
Did you get that, Rita? Okay.
I'll second that.
Ms. Jordan seconded it. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very, very much. That concludes item number 4 on our, or item number 3 on our agenda tonight. Item number 4, Commissioners' Matters. Are there any, gentlemen? No. Planning matters?
Just a couple of things, Mr. Chairman. Since your last meeting, the Board of County Commissioners went with your recommendation and staff's and approved Audrey's Feed Store, the special exception use down by Oslo and 66th Avenue as an agricultural use. And as far as we can tell, we don't believe we will have any items for the April 24th meeting, so it's likely that that meeting will be canceled. And that's all that I have.
Thank you very much, Mr. DeBrawl. Attorneys' matters, are there any?
None, sir.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.